Adobe Flash Catalyst is an interaction design tool that is part of Adobe CS5. It allows you to visually assemble a working prototype, wireframe, storyboard, or application from pre-built components or custom elements without writing any code. You can also build an application starting with designs created in Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. You first import the design into Flash Catalyst and then turn the static elements of the design into interactive working components by using the tools and panels available in the visual interface. As you visually create the application, Flash Catalyst writes code under the hood. Like Flash Builder, you use Flash Catalyst to create Flex applications, so the generated code is MXML and ActionScript. While Flash Catalyst can build fully functional applications, you can also use it to create the interface for your dynamic data-driven application in Flash Builder. Flash Catalyst projects can be imported into Flash Builder, where you can use all the techniques you have learned in this series to integrate dynamic data. You cannot send the project back to Flash Catalyst after it has been opened in Flash Builder, but you can continue to pass skins created in Flash Catalyst to Flash Builder using Flex library projects. There are two ways to create a Flash Catalyst project. The first is to create a blank application from scratch by clicking this link. The second is to create an application from an existing design file. In this video, you will learn how to create a new project from this Illustrator design file and convert it from a static interface into an interactive application that responds to events like rollovers, clicks, and drags. The final application from Flash Catalyst is fully functional and can be published for the web or desktop. However, in this video and associated exercise, you will learn how to import the project into Flash Builder and add data from this XML file. Lastly, you will learn how to export a Flex library project from Flash Catalyst and import it into Flash Builder to apply a custom skin for this horizontal scroll bar. This training series focuses on Flex application development with Flash Builder, so I will only do a quick orientation to Flash Catalyst in this video. The associated exercise focuses solely on the Flash Builder environment using provided files created in Flash Catalyst. To learn more about Flash Catalyst, explore the Adobe Flash Catalyst Developer Connection. From here, you can read articles, follow tutorials, and watch videos from the community and product experts. Alright, let's get started. Here's the Adobe Illustrator file that represents the application interface. Before Flash Catalyst, developers would use this static design simply as a guide for building an application. Now with Flash Catalyst, you can actually convert this file into the application and generate the necessary MXML and ActionScript code for Flash Builder. The key to using a design file as the basis for your Flex application is to organize it well. Notice how each of the design elements are organized into layers and sublayers that are descriptively named. In Flash Catalyst, I am clicking on the From Adobe Illustrator AI File option. In the Import dialog, I am selecting the Adobe Illustrator file that I just showed you. The import process may take a few minutes depending on the complexity of your design. When it is done, Flash Catalyst presents you with Illustrator import options. I'm only going to change the text option to keep editable so that Flash Catalyst does not convert the text fields into vector outlines. When I click OK, the import process completes and the application is displayed on the artboard. The Flash Catalyst interface is entirely visual. This means that rather than writing code, you use the panels and tools to create your application. You use the Pages and States panel to create Flex states. Note that the default interface is listed as the one and only state and is named Page 1. You use the Timelines panel to create animations and transitions, and you use the Design Time Data panel to add dummy static data to the application. Note that you cannot add dynamic data in Flash Catalyst. If you select an element on the artboard, you can use the context-sensitive Properties panel to change its properties. The Interactions panel is used to define events. The Layers panel helps you organize the elements on the artboard. Note that these layers and sublayers are exactly the same as the ones I showed you earlier in the Adobe Illustrator file. Flash Catalyst has maintained those values in the import process. The Library panel organizes the assets in the application. Since there is one image, it is placed in the Images section in a folder that is named based on the Illustrator file. When you import other media like videos and sound, you will also see them listed here. As you create components and component skins, they will be organized in this panel as well. The Wireframe Components panel contains some basic interactive Spark components that you would commonly use to build wireframes and applications. Note that this list does not include all of the Spark components or any of the MX components. If you want additional functionality, you can create a custom component in Flash Catalyst. This is the Tools panel. It contains common drawing, text, and manipulation tools that should be familiar to you if you have used a design tool like Illustrator, Photoshop, or Fireworks. As a developer, you will likely be interested in this drop-down list. While you cannot write code in Flash Catalyst, you can see the MXML and ActionScript code that is generated by selecting the Code workspace from this drop-down. The Project Navigator panel contains an expandable folder which lists the folders and files in your project. This should be familiar to you since Flash Builder contains a similar interface. All applications in Flash Catalyst are named main.mxml. The main.css file contains a mapping to the fonts used in the application, and private data.mxml contains metadata that Flash Catalyst passes on to Flash Builder. This file can actually be deleted since it does not affect your application. Back in the main.mxml file, you can see that the code is familiar and all related to interface elements like text, images, and drawn shapes. There are also some code elements that you have probably not seen before, like these design layer tags and these 3 namespaces. The design layer tags directly map the interface elements to the layers defined in the design workspace of Flash Catalyst. The namespaces identify code elements that are related to Adobe Illustrator and Flash Catalyst directly, like the names of the layers, and other tool-specific values. To clean up your code, you can actually remove the design layer tags as well as the namespaces and their associated attributes in the rest of the code. However, since these elements are very invasive, you can also choose to leave them since they will be ignored by your application. Note that the code in this view of Flash Catalyst is not editable. I will show you how to refactor it using Flash Builder later in this video. Lastly, note that all images and media stored in the Library panel are saved into this Assets directory. Here is the image of the employee that you saw earlier on the artboard. I am saving this project by selecting File, Save As. The project name is based on the name of the imported Illustrator file. Notice that Flash Catalyst saves the entire project as an FXP file, which is also a Flash Builder project archive. This is not coincidental. Rather, it allows you to directly import a Flash Catalyst project into Flash Builder as the basis for your Flash Builder project. I will show you how to do this later in this video. I'm switching back to the Design workspace and double-clicking on the Design Time Data panel to minimize it. Then I'm holding down the spacebar to temporarily access the hand tool so that I can reposition my artboard. This header, the big gray background, and the darker gray area are static elements of this design. The month text, employee image, and employee name text will become the scrollable list. I need a way to scroll the list, so the first thing I want to do is add a horizontal scroll bar to the interface. First, I am repositioning the artboard again so that I can see the lower portion of the design. And then I'm selecting the Wireframe Components panel and dragging the horizontal scroll bar component and placing it below the employee name text. Back in the Layers panel, you can see that the horizontal scroll bar component was placed in the header layer. I'm dragging it to the Employee of the Month layer and then locking the header layer so that I don't accidentally move any of the elements. I am toggling the eye icon for the application background and the content background so that you can see what they are for, and then I'm locking them as well. Next, I want to select the elements that go into the scrollable list control. When I try to click on the light gray background behind the image, Flash Catalyst actually selects the background group. Elements that are grouped together cannot be selected individually with the Select tool. I'm holding my mouse over the Select tool to activate the menu that allows me to select the Direct Select tool, which is designed to select individual elements inside of a group. Now I'm clicking away from the selected background group and then clicking on just that light gray background. I'm holding down the Shift key and then clicking to select the month, image, employee name, and horizontal scroll bar. Alternatively, I could have held down the Control key on the Windows machine or the Command key on the Mac to select these same elements in the Layers panel. In any case, these are the elements that I want to turn into my scrollable list component. You've probably already noticed this hovering panel. It is called the Heads-Up Display or HUD panel and shows you context-sensitive commands as you use the Flash Catalyst interface. Since I have selected multiple elements on the artboard, it prompts me to turn them into a component. I am clicking the Choose Component drop-down list to see that I could turn the selected items into any of these interactive components. I could also turn them into a custom generic component if I want to create my own functional component from scratch. I am selecting Data List. On the artboard, you can see that the elements are encapsulated. In the Layers panel, you can see that all the layers I've selected have been combined into one new object called Data List. The HUD panel now prompts me to define which artwork elements should be functional pieces of the Data List component. I'm switching to the Library panel to see that a new Data List 1 element has been added. This is actually the Data List component's skin. If you look at the Properties panel, you can see the skin property is set to Data List 1. I want to name the skin more descriptively, so I am double-clicking on it in the Library panel to name it Employee of the Month List Skin. I am switching to the Code workspace, where you can see that the source folder now contains a components directory with the skin class file. I'm switching back to the design workspace and clicking on the Edit Parts button in the HUD panel. The first thing you probably notice is that the non-editable elements in the artboard, like the large gray background and the header, are dimmed. The breadcrumbs bar also shows that you are now editing the Employee of the Month list skin class. The Pages States panel shows that you have both a normal and a disabled state for this component. The Layers panel displays the same layers that you selected to encapsulate the data list component earlier. Notice that the layer structure was maintained, not destroyed. I'm dragging on the artboard to create a selection box that touches all the elements in the component. Next, I'm right-clicking to select Align Horizontal Center. You may not be able to see this subtly, but the normal state shows that the elements are centered in the component, while the disabled state shows that they are slightly off-centered still. I am right-clicking on the layers in the Layers panel and then choosing Make Same in All Other States. Now both the normal and disabled states have the same display. Remember that the HUD panel prompts me to define the parts of the data list component. As a quick reminder, here is the finished working application again. You can see that there are two main parts of the data list component, the scroll bar and the repeated item. Although most list components contain both parts, only the repeated item is really required. Back in Flash Catalyst, I am using the Layers panel to select all the elements except the horizontal scroll bar component, and then clicking on the Choose Part drop-down list in the HUD panel. You can see that the repeated item is the only required part. When I select the option, the sublayers are encapsulated into an object named Repeated Item. The repeated item does not appear in the Library panel, but when I switch to the code workspace, you can see the repeated item 1.mxml class file is created in the components directory. Unfortunately, you cannot rename it from Flash Catalyst. I will show you how to rename it later in this video using Flash Builder. Note that the data group instance in the Employee of the Month list skin class now references the repeated item 1 class for the item renderer property. On the artboard, Flash Catalyst has created 3 visible instances of the repeated items stacked vertically. I want them laid out horizontally, so I am selecting the Properties panel and then expanding the Layout section to select Horizontal. You can only see one repeated item because the repeated item dimensions are too small. I will fix that in a minute, but first I want to make sure that the data list component is exactly centered in the application display. I am clicking on the Employee of the Month in the breadcrumbs bar and then right-clicking on the data list component to select Align Horizontal Center. Now I am double-clicking on the data list component to return to its Edit in Place mode, where I am selecting the repeated item to resize it. I am selecting the Transform tool and then using the selection handles to resize the repeated item area. Note that if I hold down the Alt key while dragging the selection handles, the object resizes from the center. I've made the repeated item area as wide as the gray background and just tall enough to display the repeated items. I'm switching back to the selection tool. I know that the text fields for the month and employee names are too small for the eventual dynamic data, so I will edit them as well. I must double-click on the repeated item to enter the Edit in Place mode for the individual repeated item. I'm selecting the month text and then holding down the Alt key to resize the month text from its center. I am also selecting Center for the alignment of that text. I'm clicking on the Employee Names text field and resizing that as well. Also setting its alignment to center. I'm clicking on the Employee of the Month list skin link on the breadcrumbs bar to return to the data list component skins edit in place mode. You can see that since the text fields are wider, the repeated items are more spread apart. I am running the application by selecting File, Run Project. I can alternatively use the keyboard to type Ctrl-Enter in Windows or Command-Return on the Mac. This will compile the application and run it in the browser. You can see that the data list component is functional because you can scroll the repeated items. However, when you mouse over the items, you can see that the results are awkward. The elements jump around between the normal and over states, and both the over and selected states have an unattractive rectangle highlight on them. Back in Flash Catalyst, I am double-clicking on the repeated item to enter the Edit in Place mode for one item. In the Pages States panel, you can see that there are three states: normal, over, and selected. In the little thumbnail preview for each of the states, you can see that the elements in the over and selected state are not centered as they are in the normal state. I am making sure that the normal state is selected and then selecting the elements on the artboard by clicking and dragging a selection box. When I right-click on the selected items, I can select Make Same in all other states. Now each of the states has all elements positioned in the same location. In the Layers panel, you can see that Flash Catalyst has created a layer named Item Highlight Rectangle. When I click it in the normal state, you can see that a rectangle appears selected on the artboard, but its opacity value is set to 0. When I select the over state, you can see the opacity value is set to 30. In the selected state, the rectangle's opacity value is set to 50. I don't like the look of this rectangle, so I'm going to make sure it's selected in the Layers panel and then click the trash icon to delete it. It is now gone in all three states. To indicate an over and selected interaction to the user, I'm going to change the color of this gray background behind the image. I'm selecting the rectangle and then selecting the over state. In the Properties panel, I am changing the fill color to yellow. Now I am selecting the selected state and changing the rectangle's fill color to black. As I click through each state, you can see the different background colors. I am also going to select the normal state and delete the employee name text field. That value should only appear in the over and selected states. Let's take a look at the generated code. I am selecting the code workspace and reviewing the repeated item 1.mxml code. In the first rich text mxml tag, you can see that the layer name is employee name text and that it has an include in property set to hovered and selected. As you know from earlier videos, this means that the control is only displayed in these two states. Note that the hovered state is the design workspace equivalent of the over state. Here is the code for the rectangle shape behind the image. You can see that the color value is yellow for the hovered state and black for the selected state. When I save the file and run the application, you can see that the scroll bar still works and that each of the states has the proper background color for the image, but the items are still moving around. This is happening because the normal state does not include the employee name text field, so it is smaller than the other two states. I'm closing the browser window and returning to Flash Catalyst. In the Layers panel, you can see that the employee name text field does not display a box representing it in the layer in the normal state, since I deleted it. When I click on the over state, I see a box. I'm right-clicking on the field and choosing Share to State, All States. Now when I return to the normal state, the text field exists again. Instead of deleting the field from the state, I am clicking on the eye icon in the layer. This makes the control invisible in this state. I am switching back to the code workspace to look at the rich text MXML tag for this text field. If you recall, when I deleted the text field earlier, the generated code created an include in property set to the hovered and selected states. Now the code simply has a visible property set to false in the normal state. This means that if you delete an element from a state, then it is removed from the state completely. However, if you simply toggle the eye icon, it still exists in the state but is invisible. Neither method is right or wrong. You should choose what is appropriate for your circumstance. Keep in mind that it will take longer to render elements on startup if they exist in all states, but it will be quicker to switch between states because the application only needs to change the visible property of the element. I am saving the file and running the application in the browser. You can see that the interaction now works as expected. Next, I'm going to add data to the data list component. I am selecting the Design Time Data panel. You can see that Flash Catalyst automatically assumes that text fields and images in a repeated item should be treated as editable elements. Flash Catalyst also automatically creates 5 repeated items. Note that the program follows the common programming convention of numbering items starting with 0. Since I will eventually replace this data with dynamic data in Flash Builder, I am only going to replace some of the data now. First, I want to replace the image for the second employee by double-clicking on the image in row 1. This brings up the Select Asset dialog, which displays all the assets in the library. Since only one image exists in the library, I am clicking on the Import button to import a second image. Now I am making sure that image is selected and then clicking OK to apply it in the design time data. Starting with the employee name for employee 0, I am changing the text data. The first employee is Annette Cotter, and she was the employee of the month for January. I am typing the tab key to move between cells. Andrew Brilliam is the second employee and was employee of the month for February. I'm typing the Enter or Return key to move between rows in the same column to type the other months of the year. When I reach May, I need to click on the Add Row button 7 more times to add rows for the rest of the months. I am saving the file and running the application. To see that the data has been properly added to the display. Back in the code workspace, you can see that the list component in the main.mxml file has the design time data hard-coded as an array collection object. As a Flex developer, you will likely want to replace this with dynamic data, but you can actually publish this project as a fully functional application. To do this, select File, Publish to SwiftAir, and then choose an output directory and check the appropriate options. This will generate directories in the output folder you defined. It may also take a few minutes. The generated output can include the Air desktop installer, a production-ready application that externalizes the Flex framework into SWZ files, and a run local application meant for development review.